my name is Josh, and welcome to Whimsical and Interesting Musings. Now, today I've recorded this for about the third time, so I'm going to actually jump right into it. Let's talk about Star Wars. Now, my introduction to this particular franchise was in 1999 with the release of The Phantom Menace, and I watched it when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And for the most part, I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy the prequels overall. But during that period where The Phantom Menace, it was just The Phantom Menace that came out, and all the other films in the prequel trilogy hadn't existed yet, my dad decided to start me off with the original trilogy, including starting off with The New Hope, and then Empire Strikes Back, and then Return of the Jedi. And I loved those films. I absolutely loved the characters, the main trio, Luke, Han, and Leia, played by Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and and Harrison Ford, respectively. And I loved the hell out of Darth Vader when he makes that entrance of coming into the ship, and it's sort of like a big wall of white smoke, and he just comes in and he looks down, looks around, and then he just walks on. That's an incredible moment, and it's a great entrance for a villain, and he's become one of my favourite villains / tragic heroes ever since. And I friggin' love Star Wars. It's fantastic. The prequel trilogy, on the other hand, is a completely different kettle of fish. And I feel like this particular trilogy does have problems. One of the biggest problems was them killing off the main villain in the second film halfway through. So I feel like this particular scene should have gone pretty much like it did in the Return of the Jedi, where instead of Luke and Darth Vader and the Emperor in the throne room, it's Snoke, Rey, and Kylo Ren. And what I'd have really liked, instead of where it went, where Kylo Ren ended up killing Snoke in, a fit of deception, in a little move of deception, or deceit. Instead, why doesn't Rey try to kill Snoke, and then Kylo Ren tries to have a fight with her, and then she ends up getting angered and enraged. He pushes her to rage, and she ends up, injuring him, and then she goes in for the kill, and she commits to it. She kills him. I'd have actually done it like that, and then she has this moment where she goes, oh, fuck me, I've killed this guy who I was meant to, bring back over to the dark side. That would have been a good misdirection. I feel like that would have been much better than the ending that we got, because then we wouldn't feel cheated afterwards. And it actually would have done a very good job of kind of adding a payoff to what was in the cave scene, which is she looks into a mirrored image, or a sort of, translucent veil that looks like, a mirror. And she puts her hand on it and she goes, who am I? Who are my parents? And it has that wonderful shot where you see Rey over and over and over again, almost duplicated. And that's meant to show that it's just her. She's nobody. She's nobody important. That could have come into play much later on with Kylo Ren having a fight with her in that throne room, and him kind of just saying, well, what are you really achieving by doing this? What are you really achieving by killing Snoke? You're a nobody after all, remember? Like, you looked into that mirror and you saw that you were a nobody, and now you're still going to be a nobody when you do this task. What are you going to achieve? With me, you can become somebody. With this process of becoming a Sith, you can become a somebody. You can become famous. You can become feared beyond all comprehension. And she tries to resist, but then she goes, oh, what would your friend and my father, Han Solo, say? Or what would Luke say to you if he could see you now? He'd call you weak and all these other things. And then she gets pushed over the edge and she kills Kylo Ren. That's how I'd have done it. And then Snoke thinks he's won. And then Rey just decides to yield. She decides to yield to his demands, and she becomes a Sith. That would have been much more interesting, in my opinion. And I feel like that would have been much more interesting. And then that whole entire sequence with Finn and Rose would have played out the way it was, where they sneak into the main hangar. And while it's blowing up, she decides they reunite with Rey, and then they leave off on that ship. And this time, she's a Sith Lord, but she has to pretend to be a good guy again. That would have been much more interesting to me. It would have been like Lights Out, where we know who the killer is, we know what's happened, and we're kind of rooting for the hero to get away with it, because we know that she's doing it for a purpose that's actually far beyond what she's just selfish reasons. Like, she's doing it to protect her mother in Knives Out. Whereas in Star Wars, Rey could pretty much say, I'm Sith now, and I've got to infiltrate this base to basically kill someone who's very important, or something like that, like a huge spy thriller type scenario. They could have done that, and I think even Rian Johnson. I think if Rian Johnson had that ending, he would have actually been interested to direct the last film, because I feel that that's what would have really been an interesting development. And yeah, I'd have actually included that. And I think, in my opinion anyway, I'm not that... I like to think I'm a good writer, but I hope that's a much better ending than having Snoke get killed. And one of the biggest problems, I feel like, even though I absolutely think Daisy Ridley is a fabulous actress, and I think her work in this is definitely really good acting, good performances, I feel like Rey is kind of a little bit of an overly perfect character. Because when we first meet her, she is a scavenger. She is a person who basically goes on board ships, gets scraps of metal, and she sells them on the black market to various patrons and various customers. And she gets just enough credits to, survive on food and to get decent things to live by. But the biggest problem is during the scene where she meets Han Solo and she's about to fly off in the Millennium Falcon, and she has that moment where she holds up the block or the little chip that she's got, and she says, with a smile on her face, "I bypassed the compressor." And then Han Solo has a look on his face that's like everybody else in the audience, like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? And I would have felt, because what the biggest problem with this particular trilogy is it doesn't know how to set up and pay off. A good setup and payoff should be, what's going to happen. You have enough clues early on so that when the climax happens, you don't feel cheated. A perfect example of a good setup and payoff is when Anton Chekhov, a Russian playwright, says, if a gun is introduced on the wall in Act 1, it needs to go off by Act 3, otherwise the audience would feel cheated. And in the case of Chekhov's gun with The Force Awakens, with the bypass compressor sequence, is I'd have had a scene where Rey, apart from scavenging for metal, she's a mechanic or she's an engineer, and she actually, is on board one of the big ships, one of the big, star shuttles, and she's, cleaning up the deck, or she's rearranging some pieces of metal and pieces of scrap to, fix it to make it look more presentable or whatever. And then for some strange reason, the console comes to life, and she sees that, we're in flight mode, bypass the compressor to, to fly off. And she tries to do that. She opens up the compartment and she does some little fiddling with her little screwdrivers or whatever. And she's finding it difficult to bypass the compressor because the compressor is supposed to be the thing that keeps the ship grounded, right? So, she has to basically try to override that in order to make it happen. How does she do that? She tries all sorts of different things. She tries hacking. She tries, going into it manually and rearranging some screws or some mechanics, but it doesn't work. So she begins to get, disheveled, because even though she's living fine on Tatooine, she wants to go off and, be somewhere else, away from all the dreariness, all the desert storms and all the rest of it. She wants to be away from Tatooine and go to different worlds, but she can't do that. Like, she has the opportunity to fly away at her fingertips, and she can't do it. So when she goes to the Millennium Falcon with Finn and, BB-8, she bypasses the compressor, and that smile on her face feels earned, because we know that she's been struggling to get that, and she's been wanting to fly away for ages, but she just hasn't had the means to do so. But now that she's got the confidence, now that she's got, the people behind her, she can now gain the confidence to do the things that she needs to do. And that's your setup. And the bypass the compressor scene has more, of a payoff, doesn't it? So that's actually really, that's actually the way I would have done it anyway. And it would have actually worked. And then when the scene in the throne room in The Last Jedi, jumping forward a bit, the scene where she kills, in my version, she kills Kylo Ren instead of Snoke, and instead of that, she decides to become a Sith, but she also has to infiltrate the rebellion base and try to basically usurp or try to assassinate one of the main bad guys, in this case, Leia Organa. And in this case, I think it's important to note that before she kills off Kylo Ren, like I said, she's taunted with the prospect of being a nobody. You're a nobody, you come from nowhere, you're a failure, you're weak, you're awful, you're a failure, basically. And with us, you can be somebody. You can be feared. You could be hated. You could be admired by your peers. Everyone would love you. What would, Luke Skywalker say if she could see you now giving up? He'd think you're weak. He'd think you're pathetic. And she goes, you killed your father. You're the one who's pathetic, or something like that. And she really is pushed. She's trying to resist, but then she just gives up. And she, strikes him down with her lightsaber. And she has a moment where she's genuinely surprised and she's genuinely shocked. She's shaking. And I would literally pitch that to Daisy Ridley, and I say, well, you've got to really go to that dark place. You've really got to go there and go all out, because I feel like she's a good actress. She's fabulous in this trilogy, but I feel like the script is kind of doing her a bit of a disservice. So I feel like do those bits, and then those bits would be earned. And then, of course, we go back to the compressor sequence, where when she was bypassing the compressor on her own, she didn't really do very much. She couldn't really do anything because she didn't really know enough about mechanics to kind of get herself off the ground and to fly the plane manually, to override the system so that she could pilot it manually. But when she was with Han, when she was with Finn, and when she was with BB-8, she could do that because, she had the strength of numbers and she had the strengths of friends and family behind her to try to get her out of that horrible situation. So when she does become a Sith Lord, when she does have the ultimate task of trying to kill Leia or Organa, or trying to kill, just to try to wipe out the last of the Skywalker line, she hesitates, but then she pretends to kill her, or she does kill her, and then Rey is shocked and betrayed to find that one of his friends has actually gone evil. So he tries to confront her. He even learns to become a Jedi. He was training secretly via Leia Organa, who basically gave her a couple of tools, and even he wielded a lightsaber at the end of The Force Awakens. Am I correct? So he does know how to use lightsaber. He does know how to use hand-to-hand combat. He fights Phasma in the second film. Maybe that could come into play in the final film as well. Maybe he confronts Phasma finally there instead of, on the ship when it's blowing up. And, he actually starts to, become a much more, strong and confident leader and a strong and confident ally in the rebellion, as opposed to a stormtrooper who was just following orders. And when he confronts Snoke and confronts Rey, he actually tries to remind her what his role is, what his role as her friend is supposed to be. And then maybe, I know this might not be a very popular opinion, I would actually have Finn confess his love for Rey right there. And he says, you know what, I care about you, you're my friend, and as time's gone on, I've really gotten used to it, I really find that there's more between us than meets the eye. I'd have included something like that, and then maybe Rey starts, realise that she is becoming, a little bit more darker, and she is, doing something really wrong. And all the sacrifices that Luke did to save his friends, he realises it's for nothing. But he's able to come through to her through the Force, and he's able to communicate to her and say, you have a choice here. You can come back, or you can become an agent of evil. And she fights this. Like, throughout the course of the final film, we could have a sequence, or we could have the final act of The Last Jedi, her trying to juggle with that inner conflict. And then when the final film comes round, we actually have an opportunity to really see how far she's come, because up until this point she's had it very easy. When she gets a lightsaber, she can wield it no problem. She doesn't have to worry about training or anything like that. When she uses the Force in the Rise of Skywalker, she is levitating, she's meditating, she's, got tons of revolving boulders around her, like circling around her in a revolving motion, and she's having all those easy, Jedi Force training scenes. But Luke in Empire Strikes Back was struggling to lift a single rock when he was, using the Force and meditating with Yoda. So the Force is a very difficult thing to master if you're not a Jedi. But if you're Force sensitive, that's also really important. So I feel like they could have actually had a scene where she's struggling with the Force as well. But I feel like this franchise was broken from the off. I don't think it's just one character who's the problem. I think the entire series was just very underwhelming. and I hope this particular departure from the original setup of my YouTube videos is somewhat interesting to you. And I'd like to know what would you have done if you were given the opportunity to write the sequel trilogy? What would you have done to change the problems that it might have had, or the various disappointments that you might have had? You might have felt the same way as I did. You might have just felt disappointed with the entire trilogy, that it didn't give you what you actually wanted and what you particularly associate with Star Wars. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope you have a very good day, and take care. Bye-bye for now. This has been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and take care. Bye-bye for now.